Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to week 3 of Reading Distance Learning with Mrs. Spitzley. This week I have a reading story to read with you, and it also is related to science, and there's a science experiment to do at the end if you like to do that with your family, especially if you have some leftover Easter candy. That would be an awesome thing for you to be able to do and have fun. So these are two resources that are projected here in the video with me. They are also on the slide. So you may want to be able to grab those and be able to toggle it back and forth between this video and those slides. The one up above me is a graphic organizer that we're going to go through in a minute. And the other one is the story, which I will actually read with you. But if you're like, I'd really rather not listen to Mrs. Spitzley read it, then you can fast forward through the video as I'm reading it, and you can just read that one on your own. But definitely come back to the video, please, as we go back over the graphic organizer and also the science experiment. So let's take a look at the graphic organizer together, please. As we look at this being a mystery, even though it's science related, it is the genre of a mystery. Looking at the graphic organizer, as you're listening, I want you to think about who the characters are and what their actions are, what they're doing. Moving over to the right, I want you to think about what problem they're facing. And then also, because it's a mystery, I want you to think about the hunch or your prediction. Within the problem, you're going to come up with the solution, basically. And that's going to be your hunch, because it's going to go unsolved. And then also, not just your hunch or your prediction of what the solution is, you need to back that up with a claim. So clues or evidence to be able to support your hunch. So let me go, without further ado, let me go ahead and switch slides here, and I'm going to start reading it aloud. So if you'd rather not listen to me, this would be your chance to go ahead and pause the video and then move to you reading it by yourself. So the case of the melted chocolate. Going to skip this slide. That would be the science experiment to come back to later. The case of the melted chocolate. The science behind this is, what does the greenhouse effect have to do with a melted treat? What a great day to be outside, said Danielle. She dropped an empty soda can into a bulging trash bag. She and her friend Peter were celebrating Earth Day with their science class by picking up trash in a local park. So I'm going to go ahead and stop, because you should have two characters there to record off to the side for your graphic organizer. Remember, you don't have to print that, but you should be writing down on a piece of paper the information off of that. So your characters, you've got two. You've got Danielle and you've got Peter. It's really warm out today, Peter agreed. I wonder what the temperature is. Danielle spotted their teacher walking over. Maybe Mrs. Woodward knows, she said. Mrs. Woodward, do you know what the temperature is today? Asked Peter as their teacher approached. I don't know, replied Mrs. Woodward, but we can check. I brought some thermometers for an experiment we are doing later. Let's go and find out. Danielle and Peter followed their teacher to a nearby picnic table. Mrs. Woodward handed each of them a thermometer. Peter peered at the thermometer as she passed him. It's 70 degrees out, he exclaimed. Wow, that's very warm for this time of year, said Mrs. Woodward. You two can hang on to those thermometers until later. Right now, it's time for lunch. Heating up, Peter and Danielle sat at the picnic table to eat lunch with their classmates. As they ate, Mrs. Woodward stood in front of the class. After lunch, we are going to continue our Earth Day celebration by planting trees, she announced. This activity could help prevent climate change. Danielle raised her hand. Mrs. Woodward called on her. How does planting trees help fight climate change? Danielle asked. Trees remove carbon dioxide from the air, replied Mrs. Woodward. That's interesting, said Danielle. But how does carbon dioxide affect climate change? Carbon dioxide is one of many gases that surround Earth, explained Mrs. Woodward. This layer of gases acts like a blanket that traps the sun's heat in our atmosphere. This process is called the greenhouse effect. Without this greenhouse effect, our planet would be very, very cold. But if there's too much carbon dioxide in the air, Extra heat will be trapped. And that can cause climate change? Yes, answered Mrs. Woodward. And I'm going to pause there. And if you're looking at your graphic organizer, I think you can answer some of the what they are doing. There's really two things that they've done so far with their class to celebrate Earth Day. Well, one thing they've done to celebrate Earth Day, then they pause for lunch, and then there's one more thing that they're going to do. So there's three potential things that you can write down for what they're doing. There's not really been a problem so far, but you should be on the lookout for that. Okay. Leftovers. As Danielle and Peter finished their lunch, they each had a small piece of chocolate left over. Are you going to eat that? Asked Peter, eyeing Danielle's chocolate. If not, I'll take it. Sorry, I'm going to save it for later, replied Danielle. Oh, okay. I'll save mine too, said Peter. I'm going to put mine in my sandwich container. Do you want to put yours in there? That's okay, said Danielle. I'll just leave it here. She placed her chocolate on the picnic table. Peter placed his in a container and covered the top with a piece of chocolate wrap. Let's go plant some trees, said Peter. Melted mess. Much later, Peter groaned. Planting trees is hard work. He wiped sweat from his forehead. Danielle patted down the dirt around a newly planted tree. I know. Our chocolates would taste great right now, she said. I'll get them, offered Peter. A minute later, Peter returned with 2 pieces of chocolate. He handed one to Danielle. Oh, no, exclaimed Danielle as she unwrapped her chocolate. Melted chocolate oozed from the wrapper and dripped onto the dirt. My chocolate's ruined. She looked over at Peter. He had his back turned toward her. Hey, isn't your chocolate melted too? She asked him. No, he mumbled, popping the piece of chocolate into his mouth. Mine must have stayed cool because it was covered with plastic wrap. Danielle looked at Peter suspiciously. That doesn't sound right. You took my chocolate, didn't you? No, I didn't, said Peter. Why would I do that? It was your chocolate that melted, accused Danielle. I can prove it. She stomped toward the picnic tables. Peter followed her. Danielle picked up one of the thermometers from the picnic table. She placed it inside Peter's plastic container and covered it with his plastic wrap. Then she placed the other thermometer on the picnic table next to his container. We'll know the truth soon, she said. A half hour later, Danielle peered at the 2 thermometers. I know whose chocolate melted, she announced. Whose chocolate treat melted? To find out, do the hands-on experiment. All right, so let's take a look at your graphic organizer, okay? So you should have had your characters filled out and their actions, that they were cleaning up trash. You could have also wrote down that they stopped for lunch, and you should have also had the action that they were planting trees. If you also mentioned that they were doing that to celebrate Earth Day, that would be perfect as well. Okay? Taking a look at the problem. I hope you got down that the problem was that one of the chocolates melted. You could have also added to the idea that Danielle thought that Peter had taken her chocolate. Okay? Your hunch or your prediction should have been along the lines of whose chocolate melted. So you could have had one of 2 statements there. You could have had, my hunch was Peter's chocolate melted, or you could have had the hunch or the prediction that Danielle's chocolate was the one that melted. Right? The clues or the evidence are a little bit more difficult. Actually, I am not a science person. You guys all know that very well. Also not an artist, right? So the clues are evidence. So a little bit more difficult, like what through the story, made you think that either Peter's chocolate was the one that melted or Danielle's was the chocolate that melted. So if you think back through, Peter's was in a Tupperware container with a lid on top, a plastic lid, so it was see-through. Where Danielle just put hers back, I believe she said in her paper bag, or maybe it was just on top of the picnic table. One melted, one did not. There was also a lot of talk about the greenhouse effect, about things about carbon dioxide being trapped inside the Earth's atmosphere. Okay. So I had planned to do this experiment, this in the graphic work, this in the story, and then show you the results here in the video. However, I chose this week to prep for the story, and then it became the most rainy, wet week with no sun in the history of April. So I could not do that because it requires the sun, right? The story had a sunny day in it, so I couldn't do it at all. So I'm going to show you a YouTube video about a huge, huge chunk of chocolate just out in the sun, and it's melting, right? And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk to you again because I wasn't able to replicate the experiment. So I'll see you back in just a minute. All right, so still looking at your graphic organizer, we need to get to the idea of whose chocolate melted. And then if you do the experiment, you can self-check and see if you were right. Okay, so to get you thinking about that, have you ever seen a greenhouse where people grow plants? And is the air inside that greenhouse warmer or colder? So it was actually Peter's chocolate that melted. And it was his plastic wrap that acted like a greenhouse that covered it up entirely. If you look back at the story, there is on page 2 or 3, it's the one I skipped before I got to the story. There's the experiment there about how you can conduct the same experiment as well. So all you need is some chocolate, you need a thermometer, and you need a container so that you can put one chocolate in a container, one chocolate out of the container, and you can record the temperatures of the chocolate melting. So I had some leftover Easter candy. My kids ate it. Oops. And so I was literally just going to take some chocolate chips, which we always seem to have around, and I was going to put one pile and then another pile in a plastic container. I don't have thermometers, right? You know, like we're not at school, but we do have a meat thermometer that we use to check to see whether our meat is done in the oven, and that's what I was going to do. And so since we only have one, I was only going to be able to do one experiment at a time. So I encourage you, if you like to do that, if that's interesting to you, go ahead, do it, and have fun with it. But you're going to have to wait for a sunny day, which we should have the week that you watch this video. So have a great week. I hope you enjoyed watching this, and keep learning. I'll see you here next week.